Hey everybody, this is Bo, and this is my ATC Clearances and Procedures lesson. This will be a quick mini lesson for this assignment, and it'll be about 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll see how far I can get. So the lesson objective is to make sure that the learner has the right knowledge, risk management, and skills associated with ATC Clearances and Procedures. Within this lesson, we're going to talk about ATC clearance definition, pilot responsibilities, controller responsibilities, departure restrictions, loss comm procedures, procedures for flights outside of the radar environment, and risk management. So we'll start off with an introduction hypothetical scenario here. So let's say you're going to take off in low visibility IFR. Your clearance is to maintain runway heading, climb and maintain 3,000, expect 9,000 10 minutes after. So your IMC right after takeoff, you're in the clouds, and ATC calls up and gives you an amended altitude assignment. You think they said climb and maintain 1,000, so you read back 1,000 and don't hear anything back. Now you probably should call and clarify, and you didn't get a read back, and so you don't know if you have the correct altitude assignment, and you don't know if they heard you read back that assignment. Maybe the controller's busy. You climb to 1,000 feet and level off. A few minutes later, ATC gives you immediate climb to 1,000, 11,000, turn right 90 degrees now. Turns out ATC amended your climb to 1,000, not 1,000, for terrain in your departure path. And hopefully you can see there's also a lot of other things we could talk about with this scenario, but ultimately it comes down to pilot controller responsibilities and what our responsibilities are with that and how this could have been avoided. So what exactly is an ATC clearance? According to the AIM, it's an authorization by ATC for the purpose of preventing collision between known aircraft for an aircraft to proceed under specified conditions within controlled airspace. It's really important to note that it's not an authorization for pilot to deviate from any rule, regulation, or minimum altitude, nor to conduct unsafe operation of the aircraft. If you get a clearance that you know that you're going to violate a rule or regulation or below a minimum altitude, you need to ask for a clarification or amended altitude if you know that that's going to be the case. And that comes into PIC authority. So we'll talk more about that. Within the pilot controller responsibilities, we have regulations, we have manuals, we have all these things that let us know what our responsibilities are, and that's what we're going to cover in this lesson. So the pilot responsibilities, this gets pulled from the regulations, the AIM, NOTAMs, advisory circulars, and aeronautical charts. Air traffic control uses the FAA order JO7110.65, and that's really good if you ever want to read through that. It gives you exactly what they're supposed to do and given certain situations, such as minimum fuel or declaring an emergency. And it's nice to see kind of on the other side what you can expect from the controller. They also use air traffic control and supplemental FAA directives. So in order to maintain a safe and efficient air traffic system, it's necessary that both of us, pilots and the controllers, fulfill our responsibilities to the fullest. And they're designed to overlap for redundancy. We'll start off with talking about pilot responsibilities. So with the PIC authority in 91.3, it says the pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible and is the final authority for the operation of that aircraft. If ATC issues a clearance that would cause a pilot to deviate from a rule or regulation, or in the pilot's opinion would place the aircraft in jeopardy, it's the pilot's responsibility to request and amend clearance. If you have to deviate from a rule or regulation, 91.3 says that in an in-flight emergency requiring immediate action, the pilot in command can deviate from any rule. So, and you also need to promptly comply with air traffic clearance upon receipt, except as necessary to cope with the emergency. So if you're having an emergency, you do whatever you need to do in order to deal with that in-flight emergency. And then, obviously, after you get the emergency taken care of, you need to comply with all rules and regulations. VMC on IFR flight. So our responsibility as a pilot is if we are VMC on an IFR flight, so if we can have good sight and visual and we're able to locate other aircraft, it's still our responsibility to see and avoid aircraft. Traffic clearances provide standard separation only between other IFR traffic. When we get our clearance or an instruction, we need to record that. So when conducting an IFR operation, we need to make a written record of our clearance. And we also need to read back the numbers. And what I mean by that is altitude assignments, vectors, runway assignments. Sometimes ATC gives us a whole lot of information in one call, but we're required to read back the altitude assignments, vectors, and runway assignments. It is the responsibility of the pilot to accept or refuse the clearance issued, and that's with the PIC authority. ATC instructions and clearance. So we need to acknowledge receipt and understanding of an ATC clearance. If we don't understand it, we need to request that clarification. And we need to read back any hold short runway instructions issued by ATC. Ifr Flight Requirements 91.173 in the regulations. No person may operate an aircraft in controlled airspace under IFR unless that person has filed an IFR flight plan and received an appropriate ATC clearance. If we're doing an instrument departure, where required, our responsibilities as a pilot is to consider the type of terrain and obstructions, the obstruction avoidance can be maintained or the departure procedure, and determine whether an ODP or a DP is available for obstruction clearance. Advise ATC as early as possible if requesting a visual climb over the airport. And airports with instrument approach procedures, we need to determine the actions required for that safe departure. When we're getting our departure clearance, you've probably heard of the term craft, and if you haven't, it's something that we use when we get our IFR clearance, it's in the same format every time. So CRAFT, we have a clearance limit, our route of flight, altitudes, frequencies, and our transponder code. When we're obtaining an IFR clearance en route, you got to make sure that you're aware of the position of the aircraft relative to terrain and obstructions. You may be required to have your own terrain and obstruction clearance until you can get to that minimum IFR altitude if you depart VFR and pick this up in flight. Pilot responsibilities, so we acknowledge the receipt of traffic advisories and we inform the controller if traffic is in sight. We still have to see and avoid in VMC. We comply with speed adjustments from ATC. Maintain visual separation if accepting instructions to follow another aircraft. So if ATC tells you asks you if you have the air traffic in sight and they say follow that aircraft, then we need to maintain our visual separation from that aircraft. And we need to request VFR on top if desired. ATC is not going to ask you if you want it, and they're also not going to ask you if you want a contact approach. We have to request that as pilots. We need to advise ATC of any minimum fuel status, and if we're unable to comply with the RNAV or RNP procedures, and then we also need to execute a missed approach when required by CFR Part 91, which will be a different lesson of all the things required in order to land from an instrument approach, and then follow the procedures as shown on the instrument approach procedure. So when we're flying an approach, it's our responsibility to fly that procedure as it's designed. Next would be controller responsibilities, and I'll stop that here. We're at close to 8 minutes for this mini lesson, and I appreciate your guys' time, and I'll include this whole lesson in my lesson plan in the post. Thanks for watching.